Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Tamara Monosoff, and I am so excited that you're here with us today because I have a special guest that I just cannot wait to introduce you to, that I've known personally for over 15 years. I cannot believe it. Let me introduce you to our special guest. Welcome, Anne. I'm so excited you're here. Hey,
I'm so excited too.
Thanks so much for joining us. So let me tell you about Anne. Anne Noter is not only a former news anchor, but she is also the CEO of Pitch Public Relations. And what's so exciting to bring Anne here is I know her so well because Anne represented me many years ago, and we just got such spectacular results with public relations that I wanted to bring Anne to you because I know many of you with your small businesses, your entrepreneurs, your maybe you're even a bigger brand, you've got a book, whatever it is. Anne has a boutique PR firm that specializes in getting national coverage. And it is extraordinary the results that Anne and her team get. I mean, to the point where I would get so excited when I would receive an email from Anne or her team because I would just almost catch my breath to see what was inside. These would be like, can you be on a plane tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. to get to New York to be on today's show? And I would be just like, yes, I can, even though I was terrified. So we are so excited, Anne, to have you and your expertise with us here today.
Tamara, it's so good to see you, and thank you for having me on. I love helping people get media coverage. It's my passion, so I could talk about this all day long, but I'm excited to hear what questions you have and what questions other people have, and hopefully can provide some good insight for people about this area that is so mysterious to a lot of people.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is I love from where you sit, meaning you were a new TV news anchor, which means that you know what a TV news anchor needs to receive in terms of a pitch, right? To make a good story. You also have been leading this phenomenal Pitch Public Relations now for 15 years or more. And you have got get tremendous results for your clients. And then you're also a guest in the media yourself and are often asked to speak on public relations. So what I love about that is you know what it's like to be in the hot seat and on both sides. And so I think you're so well positioned to answer the questions that we have because it's just such a unique position that you are in.
Thank you. Yeah, I spent about 10 years, I think, in TV news. I was a producer, I was a reporter, I was an anchor, I was in many markets. I loved being a journalist, but crossed over into public relations, which I think is my real passion, and have been helping brands, as you said, for the last, I've been in public relations for about 20 years now. So, and with Pitch PR, 15 years of helping small businesses, startups, leading brands, people, experts get national media coverage. And I definitely still wear that news hat a little bit in terms of figuring out how to position people and how to get them coverage. So excited to talk about all of it.
I love it. One of the questions that I often hear is people don't know the difference between PR and advertising. Can you just quickly explain what this is, what the difference is?
It is a question that comes up a lot and it can be confusing, but I mean, really advertising is a paid placement, with print or online, you're buying space to promote your company or business. And in broadcast, you're buying airtime to be able to say what you want about your business or company. So it's that paid placement. And when we're talking about public relations, it's really earned editorial coverage. So it's the media talking about you. It's not an exchange of paid placement. It's them talking about your company, whether it's an interview or an article or a story about you or your business. And what I love about PR is that editorial coverage has an implied third-party endorsement. It's the idea that if the New York Times is writing about you or you're on the Today Show, you must be credible. Your business must be credible. So that value that PR has is different than that paid placement where consumers are savvy and know that you sort of bought that ad and can say what you want. The idea is we want the media writing about you. So it's a little bit removed in terms of that third party. So that's really our focus. There are other aspects of social media and digital marketing, and all of that sort of falls under marketing. Mm-hmm. PR, it's really media relations focused and getting editorial earned press coverage. Print, broadcast, online, you name it.
I love it. And tell, if you will, talk about like what makes a great media pitch. I know a lot of us are sitting here going, what do we even say? And are we worthy of the media coverage?
Well, first of all, I'll say that the opportunities are out there. I mean, media is looking for good stories first and foremost. That will always be the case. And so in terms of, what makes a good pitch, first of all, it's what is interesting about your business, small business, book, expertise. Everyone typically starts a business to solve a problem or to offer, entertainment or information to people. There's something that people get out of it. And so really identifying what that is, what is the value of your business, your small business, your book, that is going to be the heart of the pitch. And then in terms of every media pitch, the reason that they want to cover you, there needs to be timeliness. So why is this a story now versus 6 months ago, 6 months from now? What is it about this moment that makes this a story or makes this a good interview opportunity? So identifying a little bit of that timeliness is going to help. Relevancy, what is happening in the world or what people are thinking about or what's happening in the news? Is there that tie-in that you can attach to? That's going to really make a stronger pitch. And then what is the takeaway for the person reading the article or watching you in an interview? What do they get out of it? And if you can identify that, that's going to help you pitch the media. They want to make sure their readers, their viewers, their listeners get something out of the story. So what is it that they get? And identifying that, putting that into the pitch is really going to help. We can talk a little bit more about this later maybe, but also understanding a little bit about media. There's a difference between a business writer versus a feature writer versus a TV story versus a print story. So when you're thinking about media coverage, taking into consideration all of those different aspects of media and making sure the pitch aligns with the person that we're pitching.
I love that. And also, do you recommend people watch the shows or read the magazines that they want to be featured in?
From our end, our agency works with media all the time. And I say that we need to be consumers of news too. And we are. We're always paying attention to, first of all, the kinds of stories that people are writing about, the voice, the kind of style that they have, to make sure that our pitches align with what they would write about. And I think that's the case for someone who can do it themselves too. If you're, watching your local morning show and they have guests on, what do those sort of topics typically look like? What do those interviews typically look like? So that when you reach out, you can really reference. I know you often have people live on set. I'd like to, offer a little bit about why I'd be a great guest. Or if you're trying to get, a print article, what do they typically cover? What does this writer typically cover? And how can you mention that? It definitely helps.
I love that. And to talk about what is the right, I don't know if there's a right media strategy, but what is the right strategy when you're pitching the media?
Well, first of all, we help identify that a little bit for companies, figuring out, first of all, what the audience is. Are we trying to reach other businesses? Are we trying to reach consumers? Are we trying to reach just local media in your market? Is it national media? Is it trade? So first of all, kind of understanding who your audience is important to make sure that the media targets align with that. I think that's an important first step in sort of strategy. And then there's always a little experimentation with press coverage to see what works. We do it all for clients, everything from national to local markets to trade publications to online to radio to podcast. There's a little bit of everything in the beginning to really see what's resonating, what's working, and then we lean in a little bit more and adjust the strategy depending on that. So in the beginning, I think it's good to be open to all kinds of media and experiment a little bit with that to see what works. Certainly different mediums have different benefits. Magazines have staying power. You see them in doctors' offices like 3 years later, right? There's something about that. And then online is great for SEO because there's, links that click back to you or your business. And then broadcast is great because it's a visual medium and you have an opportunity to really connect visually. So there's benefits to different kind of mediums. And I think sort of understanding the value of those means that you can try different aspects rather than just settle on, I only want, the New York Times or only want the Today Show. There's more than that we can do.
I love that you say that, because when you've pitched several of my books and we just got, I mean, the media coverage was off the charts. And we did major national shows, Today Show,
Yeah.
Good Morning America, CNN. But also I found what was really interesting is sometimes I almost felt like there was more impact from the local shows. Because it's almost like you're a bigger fish in a smaller pond kind of a fit thing. And that oftentimes that would create much more momentum, and I would get a lot of traction, really, people coming to me wanting to learn more when they saw me. Oh my gosh, I just saw you. I was getting ready for work, and I saw you on the show. So, I think it's really important that you say that, yes, there are the Today shows, but in fact, a lot of times there are other types of media that may even get you more of an impact in the results that you're looking for.
Absolutely. Local definitely being a part of that. And often they have more thorough features, deeper, longer pieces. They can give you more time, so to speak, for your story. And that certainly has value. Or a local station might run the story over and over. It runs all morning, it runs on the evening news. You get more impact from that feature. So I always tell people not to overlook the value of local, and then just media in general. We've had a client on Seattle TV, and then all of a sudden a Today Show producer saw it and wanted to have them on. We've had like a local newspaper story get syndicated by Associated Press or Scripps and then run in multiple hundreds of newspapers. Now a lot of TV stations are connected by the same owner. So that could be Gray Television, it could be Scripps TV, where they really share content. You could be on a TV station in Raleigh and it run on hundreds of other sister stations because they have the same parent company. So sometimes a seemingly smaller media opportunity can land a much larger result.
I love that. Thanks so much for saying that, because I know that sometimes when we reach out to you, it's always like, Anne, I want the Today Show. You're like, but wait.
But we do that too. We do that
I know
too.
you do.
We just had a client on the Today Show a couple of weeks ago. They did a great piece on their business, and it was quite thorough. So those higher impact, national media opportunities are always our focus, and we know that those have value, but we also supplement with other media because it takes quality and quantity to really see PR results. You have to have really good stories in the right places, and then you need a lot of press. So that's where you're going to see the value.
Wonderful. Now, before we go to the next question, I just want to welcome you. I see people are here, so be sure and say hello. I think we've got some comments now. Say hello. Thank you. Yay. I'm so glad you're here. Appreciating these tips. Good. Yes. Ask Anne. We have Anne. Anne is a very busy woman. She's getting all of us in the news. So please do. This is such a rare and special opportunity to ask Anne your questions. And it can be, please don't think that your question, it can be absolutely anything. Don't, worry about the level of your question. It can be anything. And Anne is happy to answer. In fact, and we did have someone, Claudia actually, who emailed me earlier, who said that she wanted to ask if she has a book, and she wanted to know if, because she doesn't have a big platform, she doesn't have a large social media presence. Everyone always talks about your author platform specifically in terms of like having this large presence. If you don't have that type of presence yet, and you have your book coming out, is the media still interested in featuring you?
Yes, is the short answer. A little more of an explanation. So mainstream media, when I talk about mainstream media, it's the traditional press that we think of, the Chicago Tribune and, the San Francisco Times. And we've talked about the Today Show and all those outlets, and Forbes and Inc. and all those kinds of media that we sort of know and consider to be more mainstream traditional media. They are less concerned with that aspect and much more concerned with the pitch, the relevancy, the story, why this matters to their reader or viewer, what the takeaway is, what the value is, why is this a news story now? All of those elements are what matters to them. Where it does play a little bit of a part is in podcasts, some podcast interviews, not all, but some of them have guests on that can help attribute to their audience, right? And can contribute viewers and listeners. So they sometimes are looking at your reach before they're booking you as a guest for a podcast. Not all, but some. So that's the only medium where I think that comes into play. It doesn't prohibit you from getting press in most places. There are still lots of ways that you can find your story and find your pitch and contribute in terms of media story. And ultimately, we hope that all the press coverage contributes to your platform, right? And allows you to grow that way. So it's a little bit about sort of what comes first. And then once you do, maybe there might be more opportunities. And it's not to say that you can't get podcast interviews if you don't have a larger platform, but that's one area where some podcasts pay attention to it. It's a good question.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually, because that leads me to another question is the whole landscape has changed. The whole world has changed, as we well know, in the last couple of years. And so that was one thing that you had mentioned, is that now we have this just surgence of podcasts, and they can be a great opportunity. Talk about that shift in the landscape, and what you're seeing overall in terms of the difference in getting our stories featured in the media.
Yeah, the media is always changing, right? There's always different ways. I think a couple of things have changed kind of over time, even since you and I have worked together. First of all, there's more media outlets than ever, right? So, there's emerging media that didn't exist 20 years ago, like Axios and Digiday and Morning Consult, and all these like media platforms that are newer, have and are national and have quite the reach. So there's a lot more opportunity in terms of just media. They're churning out a lot more stories than they used to. It used to be that a reporter would have a story that maybe would run this day, and then they might have a story that would run several days later or a week later. You'll see now, if you look at mediums and news stories, you'll see sometimes reporters put 2 and 3 stories out a day, which is different. So they're churning out a lot of coverage. They're looking for stories, ways to make it easier for them, right, to write and produce stories. So that's a little bit different. Obviously, when COVID happened and the world shut down, everybody went on Zoom, and it created a different way for media to do interviews. It used to be that you had to get on a plane, Tamara, as we had to do so many times, and go to Chicago and go to New York. And now media is adapted to that remote interview. So there's opportunities to be in all kinds of markets just from your home office, right? You can be on in LA and Chicago. We do that for clients all the time, where they're on different, TV stations across the country, but they're just home and don't have to travel. So that's a little bit different. And then the rise of podcasts, for sure. Almost everybody has a podcast anymore. And a lot of traditional mainstream media outlets have podcasts too. There's Forbes podcasts. There's Financial Times podcasts. There's lots of podcasts that are associated with other news outlets. And then there's, more specific sort of niche podcasts too, that typically have great interested audiences in certain, areas. So that provides opportunity for coverage. So the landscape has changed for sure. What doesn't change is a good pitch to get media to want to cover. That will never change. That will always be the same.
Well, it's interesting too what you said. In this change, there are some networks that are putting out more stories than they ever have before, which means that they need us and our stories to share, because they're looking constantly for good people to feature.
They are. And another thing I'll say about that in terms of producing more stories too is a lot of news outlets rely on contributors and freelancers for content. They don't have as many paid staff as they used to. So there's been a little bit of a decline in media in terms of downsizing their paid staff, which is unfortunate. But you've probably seen stories like that where certain outlets have, laid off reporters or had certain downsizing, but they're still producing a lot of content. And what that means is they're looking for freelancers to write and contribute stories, or they're looking for outside contributions to run as pieces. So that has created a different opportunity to get coverage, but it's a little bit different than pitching a reporter on staff.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think what also is really fascinating is I remember you were pitching me all the time for my books and one of the things that I found to be interesting is it really is a timing issue too. And what stories are already being featured on the show, because sometimes, I would think, well, what's going to happen? We do one story and then maybe we didn't get the other story. But then a few months later, I would hear from the reporter, I'd hear from you saying, yes, we're ready to do the story. So it's really interesting how it all builds. So, you're featured one place and you think you're going to be, you're pitched to another place and you may not hear right away. but then it starts to almost create this domino effect where I found for years I was hearing and getting media interviews, even, after all of the big rush of media at the beginning of when each book would come out.
100%. You're so right. And we talk about that all the time here at our agency. We're sort of relentless in terms of pitching. But sometimes we have to kind of catch a reporter or producer at the right time. So we may pitch them, a month ago. Doesn't mean we're not going to try again, if we didn't hear back or it wasn't the right fit. So sometimes it's just timing. What else is happening? What else is the reporter working on? What other stories do they have? Do they have a quick opportunity for a story? Are you hitting them at the right time? Did they see something that resonated with them and all of a sudden they want to do it? So there is a timing aspect to it, and definitely more media gets more media. So there's this momentum that can build by continuing to pitch and get yourself out there. And as I said, reporters, producers, media, they do pay attention to other stories. So sometimes they'll see something and say, that's going to work for us. Let's do a piece on this too. So for sure, you're right.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And tell me also, okay, this is the big thing that I know a lot of people are asking. What are common mistakes that people make when they've landed on the show? You call them and you say, you're going to be on the Today Show. Here's your moment of fame. Here's one of your moments of fame, because you're going to get so many more other interviews, but here's a moment of fame. What are some common mistakes that people make on air that they should know ahead of time so that they don't make those mistakes?
Yeah. And we always try to, prep our clients so they're not making these mistakes. But I think, first of all, being able to really answer in 20 seconds or less, what is your business, or what is your product, or what is your book about? Like, that question has to be nailed down in terms of an answer in literally 20 seconds or less. You're not going to have 5 minutes to talk about your business right out of the gate. So I think sometimes people get stuck on that interview question with, Tamara, tell me about your business, or Tamara, tell me about your book. And it's so open-ended, and they're giving you an opportunity, right? So nail down that answer. 20 seconds or less. Tell me about your business. Tell me about your product. Tell me about your book. Get that really tight. That's probably one of the first questions you're going to get, right, in an interview. So I think a mistake is to not really nail that down. The other thing I think is to go into an interview sometimes thinking you have to promote your business. And we talked a little bit about in the beginning of this interview about the value of third-party media and editorial press. So don't take that away by feeling like you have to do an ad. It's not an ad, right? It's an interview. So that will just inherently come. A viewer will see you and hear about your book or your business or your product and want to reach out or want to use you as a company because they think you're of value. They think it's interesting. They think you're credible because you were just interviewed. So don't take that away by feeling like you have to promote in your interview. I think that's a mistake. And then in terms of, sort of nailing down that messaging for sure, making sure you have what you want to talk about. It should be probably no more than 3 things. So what is it I'm going to talk about in this interview? And I'm going to get that in no matter what they ask. Really preparing that way. And then the last mistake I will say maybe is not using that media. Once you get a TV feature or a clip, a story, and you have that great link, you want to put it on social media. You want to put it on your website. You want to tout it and be able to say, hey, I was featured by Fox News, or I was on MSNBC, or whatever the case may be. So use the coverage.
I love that. Yeah, I think also, Anne, I'd like you to speak to something because I've experienced this personally, having done so many shows in the past. And one of the things that I think early on kind of threw me, that I learned how to manage later, but early on, what happened for me is first of all, 2 things. One is I would let the TV host just lead the questions, and then oftentimes I'd lead the interview was like 2 minutes long, especially if it's national. Yeah. And you're like, wait a minute, I didn't say anything I meant to say. Yeah. And it's so disappointing. So I love what you said. Don't prepare to the point where your answers are mechanical, but prepare enough that you can make sure to add in what you need to get also from the interview, as well as be a great guest and give people and the audience what they need. So I was so glad that you mentioned that. But what advice do you give to others? Like, I remember sometimes too being, a little bit thrown off or surprised when the host, who I've seen, for years on television, really have no interest whatsoever in my book or business.
Mhm.
And you're sitting there and you can just feel it. And you're just like, oh my gosh, they don't care. And that's going through your head, actually, because they're thinking about their next segment. And, sometimes when you're like in the Today Show, or wherever, you'll be there and they have lined up literally different segments in the same room that you're in. Like, I've been there where it's literally the camera then leaves you, goes to the next one, goes to the next one.
Yeah.
So the host may already be thinking about like the next segment. Who knows? But I just remember just thinking, oh my gosh, if they don't care, what do you do to draw, what do you do for yourself to make sure that the interview is still awesome and you do a great job?
Oh my gosh, so much of what you talked about, I'm nodding and thinking, gosh, we could probably talk about this just for an hour, right? But a couple of thoughts. I mean, one is that I think, yes, going into an interview and say, what do I want to get in? What do I want to make sure? And by figuring that out is, obviously your business, book, project, whatever it is you're talking about, that 20-second answer. But then why people should care, why this matters, why is it important? Those kinds of sort of aspects to what you want to say should be identified so that you can go in there and be prepared to cover that. Don't expect the reporter to say, well, why should anyone buy this? Or why is your business of value? They're not going to specifically answer that. You need to make sure that you work that in and have that preparation. So coming into that to help sort of lead an interview is going to help you for sure. I think the disinterested sort of host or guest, and I know who you're talking about, Tamara. I think it's interesting. A couple of things. I mean, one is, first of all, a lot of times we as the publicist or whomever is pitching and getting the interview is doing so through a booking producer or an assignment editor, not the anchor who's actually doing the interview. So there's a little bit of a disconnect. Even when I was I anchored the morning news show for about 6 years, and the producer would say, okay, your next guest is on to talk about this new book, about, getting in shape or whatever the interview would be. And I would just quickly look through it in the 2 minutes I had before the interview and sit down and not really know really much about the book. We were doing, anchoring an hour segment. That's just kind of the way that is. So oftentimes you have this great preparation with the producer about all the things you want to talk about and what the book's about, and the producer knows everything and they've got you, and then they throw you in with an anchor who doesn't know anything about it. So that sometimes happens. Staying engaged and still seeing the value of the opportunity in this interview that you can get out of it. You can be excited, enthusiastic. It's not about what the anchor or host is doing, it's about what you are doing. And typically when you're a good interview and you're giving really good information, the host suddenly perks up, right? And starts to say, oh, this person's giving us good information and our viewers are getting good information. And it will help the interview go a little bit longer too. So some of that is just media training, which we do and help people with. But I think getting comfortable with an interview and going into it with that preparation of, I know how to describe my business succinctly, clearly, and I've got these specific talking points that I want to go into it, and then making sure that you're doing that in the interview.
I love that. And just to add on to this, and then we have some questions here that I want to make sure that people get answered, and it's a little bit of a little bit of just some advice from you as well, is that also in these interviews, sometimes what happens is the TV host goes off on a tangent, or if you're interviewed by two hosts, they are bantering.
And you're just sitting there.
And you're just sitting there going, okay, my 1 minute is up. I've got 60 seconds left, that kind of a thing. And so and especially also sometimes like when they're bantering, sometimes they're joking and it's going off on a tangent that really has nothing to do with what you're talking about. And so if you will, I learned it just from doing, but I'd love to hear from you since you are an expert in this. How do you redirect the conversation gracefully so that you're being, a great guest, because they will, you want to be a great guest and you want to be respectful, but you also need to re-steer the conversation so that it's not off on, some other thing than why you have flown across the entire nation to be there. So do talk about that, if you will.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of understanding kind of like the politician pivot, right? And so we don't want to just make sure that we're not answering questions that they're asking, or, again, going in so regimented that you're not able to sort of adapt to the conversation that's happening. But typically, if they're kind of going off on a tangent, or, the interview is going in a direction that's not really of benefit to you, not really what you were going to talk about, there's sort of those transitional statements that you can use to get back on track. Like, well, what's really important here is this, or, what I'd love to talk about, because this is why people are thinking about this issue, is this. And so using sort of those transitional statements to get back on track will often help. And that helps too with an interview if they're asking you something that's a little bit off. They're asking you a question and you really want to talk about this. Can you kind of merge those two by saying, well, that's a great point, or something that, maybe is for a different conversation, but what's really important here is this. And so the kind of a little bit of those transitional statements kind of help you get back on track.
Love it. Love it so much. Okay, now we've got a few questions. Welcome everyone who's just joining us now. And we have a few more minutes with Anne, so please do post your questions while we've got her. Okay, what's the difference between self-publishing and an indie publisher and pitching your story to be successful? Okay, that's a good question.
So yeah, and it's interesting because I've worked with a lot of authors and books, and everybody from those who've had big publishing houses to self-published. And it kind of goes back to that question that we had a little bit earlier about whether you have a large platform and when that matters. It's the publishing aspect of a book isn't as critical to media outlets as the pitch, the story, why this is a good interview or topic for them to cover. Sometimes, with publishers, and they have a little bit of obviously marketing support and PR support that sometimes comes with it, although that sometimes is a little bit iffy too. Media is interested in, why is this a good story? Why is this a good person to interview? Why do I want to write about this or put this person on TV? The aspects of your social media platform, who's published the book, all of those are not critical to the core news judgment that they're going to have about it. So that's what's going to help you get coverage, not whether you're sort of attached to a publisher, or self-published, or you have an indie publisher. It's getting to the core of sort of the book's message.
Love that. Thank you. And it's really great to hear that, actually, because I feel like we have so much self-doubt when we're first coming out with a book, like, why me? But, usually you've written this book because you have an area of expertise and knowledge, and you have a message to get out to the world. Even if it's a fiction book, you have a story to tell. So why not you? And
absolutely. And I can probably count, on my less than my hand, how many times the media outlet in the 20 plus years I've been doing this said, who's the publisher of the book? Or what's the publishing house? That's not a question they ask at all. Maybe a couple of times if they were doing sort of a roundup of books in a story and they wanted to sort of identify the publisher next to it. You've probably seen those kind of stories. That's probably the only way that that's ever come up. It's not a question that media ask. They say, why is this a person an expert in their field? They often ask, have they done interviews before? Are they a good interview? And we have to figure out ways to be able to say, yes, they're going to be a good interview, and why, right? What's their expertise? What is the book about? What is the reader or viewer going to get from this interview? What's the takeaway? Those are the questions reporters ask.
Those are fantastic questions that each one of us can ask ourselves when we're thinking of pitching the media. I love that, Anne. Okay, someone is asking, do you feel that because there are so many podcasts out there, it diminishes as a, that is not a finished as a good connection. Maybe. And no, I think they said, that it diminishes.
I think I get the gist of what they're saying. Like, there's so many podcasts out there. Like, are they valuable still? Maybe, like, does it diminish it to be able to say, I was on this podcast or whatever? There are some podcasts that have a very, very large audience, and there are some that have very small audiences. It's kind of like how we used to think of blogs. There were blogs that were tremendous, attached to other mainstream media that had such wide readership, and then there were people blogging in their basement that their just family would read. So podcasts are a little bit like that. They're all over the place. Usually you can tell a podcast reach by its platform, the social media, and sometimes they'll list, listenership too, because they're selling ads. And so sometimes you can kind of identify the reach of a podcast based on that to see if it's of value. But usually podcasts have value in terms of interviews because people are actively listening. They're specifically going to that podcast to watch an interview, listen to an interview, whatever the case may be. So you get kind of that captive audience that sometimes you don't get with other media. National TV or local TV, people are cooking and working and have it in the background, right? Sometimes. So a podcast is typically someone who's really listening intently. So there's value in that. And it goes back to a little bit what I was talking about of experimentation too. It's worth trying podcasts to see if that has value for you. And you certainly can still tout it and promote it as being on, because it still has that editorial credibility that we've talked about.
Oh, that's excellent. Thanks so much. Thank you. We're getting lovely messages. There we go. Hey, Carrie, so glad you're here. Carrie has a question. And what's a good strategy to get back on a show you were on a couple of years back, especially if the host is new now?
That's a good question. Well, it's interesting because media, reporters, producers, they all have very short attention spans, right? So what they did yesterday is far removed. Every day is like a new day. Every story is a new story. So I think one strategy is to, again, talk about why it's relevant now. What would be the reason to do an interview now? Can you attach some relevance to it? But having been on a show years back does give you that media presence you can tout, because it is a question producers, specifically with TV, ask is this person a good interview? Have they done TV interviews before, particularly for national TV, which I'm going off on a tangent a little bit, but national TV is a reason why sometimes you want to do local first, so that when you get to national TV, you have examples of interviews that you've done, because it's something that they typically do ask. They don't want to put someone on TV who's not going to be comfortable doing an interview, and they want to make sure that you're a good interview. So local TV can help with that. So if you've got a past interview, going back to Carrie's question, it helps because you could be able to say, here's an example that I was on before, or here's an interview I did before, and be able to tout that. But you want to make sure you're saying what's fresh and new now. They don't want to do the same story that they did with you. So is there something a little bit fresh or different or new or relevant to what's happening now that you can attach to get back on?
I love that. Thank you so much. And also just one last question, because I know I want to be respectful of your time and so grateful. This has just been so incredible. And so especially for authors, what if they have a book? I know it's like news is timely when the launch is coming out. First of all, two questions actually. When a launch is coming out, when should they work with you? Like, let's say we're coming out in, January or April or whatever. How far back do people, like, how much time do you need to actually successfully pitch the book? And then for those who have already published their book, who really they didn't know really how to get the word out about their book, and maybe it's a year old or even older, is there any way to resurrect that book? I have ideas about how to do that, but I wanted to hear your perspective in terms of PR specifically.
Yes. Okay. So for the first question, in terms of when to start, there is a little bit of ramp up that needs to happen, right? Before you're getting interviews, before you're getting coverage. So with a book that's coming out, I always love to start the PR 2 to 3 months in advance. Sometimes we do a little bit shorter if we know it's going to be, coming on, but that 2 to 3 months gives us enough time to be able to really nail down messaging, to be able to start outreach, to be able to start get things going in terms of media. Sometimes reporters want to see the book or read the book before they do an interview. So there's a little bit of that happens too. And then ultimately to get coverage to hit when the book is out and you have the most value, and then be able to have sort of that domino effect that we've talked about. So that's typically good timing. If that's ideal, and that doesn't always happen. So if it's a book that's coming out tomorrow, there's still lots of opportunities, right, to get coverage. We don't have to have that big ramp up. And if it's a book that's already out that you've written and maybe you haven't done publicity for, is it still fresh to the media? That's going to be important. So if you didn't have a lot of media coverage because you didn't really know about it, or you didn't do any publicity, then we can make it fresh and new with media, or you can make it fresh and new with media, because it's a topic that's still important, it's still relevant. Why is this a story? And if it hasn't been covered, it's still fresh and new to them. And that's the case even with businesses. Sometimes companies come to us and say, well, we've been around for 6 or 7 years, but we've never really done PR. We've been around for 10 years. We've never really done PR. And we say, well, then you're still new to the media, and we can figure out ways to make that fresh and relevant. So the pitch isn't going to be the book is out now, and it's not going to be your business just launched, because that happened before. but it's going to be, why is this a story now? And why is this still good takeaway for someone reading it? So there's lots of opportunities still to do that.
I love that answer so much, because I think there are many of us who thought, oh gosh, it's too late. And I just love that you can repackage it because it hasn't been out yet. So I love that that it really, whatever stage you are in, whether it's an older book, you're coming out with a book soon, or you just launched, you still have a whole opportunity ahead of you. It's not too late. So I really appreciate that. And I think a lot of people have had that question. So with that said, first of all, really nice comment from Carrie. You got me national coverage when I first launched my book. I still repurpose them to this day. Thank you, Anne. Yeah,
wonderful.
That's so nice. So let me do this, Anne. What is the best way for people to contact you? I have your email address. Is that the best way?
That's perfect. Yes, Anne at pitchpublicrelations.com. I'm happy, first of all, to answer any questions that maybe we didn't get to, or if you wanted to be really specific about your book or your business, I can maybe give you a little insight that might help. Obviously, if you're interested in working with us too, I'd love to hear from you too and figure out if we may be a fit to help you with your PR. But I'm always an advocate for people getting media coverage. I think PR has so much value. There's so much opportunity for coverage, as we've talked about, with all different kinds of mediums, national, local, print, broadcast, podcast, more content opportunities, more media than ever. It's all about the pitch, right? Can we get that really tight and narrow for the specific person that we're pitching, which is different for each one, right? There's different producers and different reporters that cover different things. But if we can get that really narrowed down, you have such opportunity for great coverage, and that media coverage can really drive sales, raise your profile in the media, get partnerships, all kinds of opportunities that come from PR and media coverage. So I feel like the time went so fast, Tamara, but I hope we got good content in.
Oh, we did. I mean, it's incredible. And I'm glad you actually brought that up, because if you are watching the replay, first of all, thank you to all of you who have joined us live. It's been so much fun to answer your questions. And if you are watching the replay later, still put your questions in the comments, whether you're watching, we're actually simulcasting to multiple streams to different platforms. So wherever you are watching this, please put your questions in the comments, and Anne and I will be watching, and I'll make sure that Anne sees your questions and she can answer anything that you have, maybe post-interview. I'm sure this has created a lot of people's ideas are sparking about what's possible for them. Having had the experience of working with you, it was just tremendous. I had so much fun, and the coverage was just like off the charts. And I just think it was also just such a joy, and to work with you and your team, because not only are you are so results oriented, but also really kind. And it's like you can say, I'm scared, I'm going on this show or that show, what do I do? What are some things that I can do to prepare myself for this amazing opportunity? And so you're always there to not only get the coverage, but also to guide and, actually create some comfort for us who are stepping sometimes beyond our comfort zones when we go get featured in the media for the first time.
Oh, that's so nice, Tamara. I love working with you too. That was such a great time getting all that great coverage. And you became such a pro on the media side that I didn't have to do much hand holding, but I understand that people get nervous for doing interviews, and we always try to help with preparation too, and make sure the more you do, the easier it gets. Reporters tend to ask the same kinds of questions over and over. So again, nailing down that really good answer to that, tell me about your book, tell me about your business, get that really, really strong.
Thank you so much for your time, Anne. It has been just a joy to be with you.
My pleasure, Tamara. It was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining. Talk to you soon. Bye.